Hello. Is this working on tech? Yep, all good. Great. Welcome. My name is Melissa from We Can Make, and welcome to our first talk today, which is a new way to build how to grow a low-carbon home. So this is going to be a bit of a talk, a bit of a practical demonstration, a bit of kind of mixing things up. So it's a nice, exciting session. And it's like one of the biggest challenges we have, and one of the kind of almost unspoken challenges. Everyone talks about kind of the energy we burn when we're kind of heating our homes, but it's often forgotten about is the energy that goes into making our homes in the first place. And we all kind of like need to know that reducing the embodied carbon in our built environment is one of the major challenges in terms of meeting the climate emergency that we're in. Yes, urgent action is really, really required, but it's quite kind of shocking. Oh, okay. I'll try and shout a bit louder. Yes, please. Bit louder. Okay. So this is the mic for the live stream. So hopefully everyone's feeling it. Should I lower for the live stream, louder in the room? Yeah. Yeah. Live stream's great. Okay. So just to recap. Yep. Telling other people to hush.
Hey everyone, this is one of those lovely moments when we're figuring out how to make things work. So, if you want to have a chat, head out over there or go upstairs. We are going to try and put the live stream on that screen in a second so that all the headphones can also work. So for the next 10 minutes, just keep your voice down in here, concentrate on that. If you're missing it, the live stream will be available, but in a few minutes those headphones might also play what's happening over here.
Yeah.
Give us a couple of seconds. If you're talking, please go outside or upstairs.
Yeah. And also just to say, this isn't the only thing that's happening now. There's also upstairs the circular economy, making things with bunting. And I know it's really nice and chill up there. And then next door in the factory space, it's going to start very soon the working with clay and a very nice hands-on demonstration. So if it begins to feel a bit too much, too crowded in here, you can exit and go and do a nice thing over there as well. So just to recap my introduction, Melissa from We Can Make. And this workshop is a new way to build how to grow a low carbon home. And it's really trying to tackle on head on how do we reduce the embodied carbon in our built environment. It's a really urgent challenge in terms of tackling the climate emergency, but it's often neglected when we talk about it. It gets lost in, oh, we've got a housing crisis, we need to build more, we need to do more. But the thing is, we're actually going to bust our entire carbon budget in the UK by the end, 1.5 degrees by 2026. By 2026, that's like almost next year. It's like we simply do not have the carbon budget and the materials to build all the new homes that we're meant to be building, and then also to retrofit all of the homes, one home every 3 seconds. Where does this material kind of come from? So we need desperately to do things differently. And I think that can only come from how can we reimagine our relationship with land, material, and people, which gets to the heart of what Retrofit Reimagined is all about. I think it's quite amazing. At the moment, the UK is the second biggest importer of timber in the world, just after China. It's kind of crazy. And what we do with the majority of that wood that we import, we burn it in wood pellets and our nuclear power stations. It's entirely nuts. And then at the same time, the UK is one of the most forest depleted countries going. We've just got 13% of forest cover compared to kind of 40% compared to the rest of Europe. And like Scotland is doing most of the heavy lifting on that 13% as well. So how do we change things up? How do we rethink where we get our materials from and the relationship with land and all the other things? That's a really big challenge. But the great thing is we've got some really great contributors here today to share how they are exactly doing that, getting to grips with this and practically and demonstratively doing this on the ground. These are kind of some of them are an emerging experiments. Some of them are talking about big strategy and policy changes as well. And this is kind of like doing one of those big shifts that we need to do on materials. And so, first of all, I'm going to introduce Peter from We Can Make Team, and then Jonathan from Block Build. And they're going to share some of their adventures in how do you grow a low carbon home.
Ace, thanks very much, Melissa. I joined We Can Make about a year ago, and what I started doing was looking at the homes that we built last year and basically taking... Yep, sure. I'll give it my best go. Yeah, so I was looking at the homes that we had already built, looking at how we built them, and we've been working with Block Build for a few years now. They build a OSB-based cassette system, which is basically these kind of big OSB boxes, and we've got some more next door. And so we were looking at those and how we might be able to modify those, but also looking at the whole building and how we might be able to include more locally grown timber and more low-carbon methods through the whole process. So that kind of started off with a big investigation into just how timber supply works in the UK. And if you look behind you on the wall, it's a little bit glary, but there's a giant map of timber supply chains in the UK. And if you can see at the bottom, that giant purple chunk is what Melissa was talking about, of imported wood fuel. So it's this vast quantity, more than all of the timber that's felled in the UK is imported and burned. So looking at that, we can start to see and pick apart where this timber actually goes and how much of it ends up in construction. And it's actually this really tiny proportion that ends up being built into buildings, and much more of that is imported from other countries. But one of the interesting parts of that is actually that we do produce quite a lot of panel boards made of wood fiber strands like OSB. So that's actually one of the areas where we can be kind of most effective. It's something that's already being produced in the UK and has the potential to use a lot of the kind of UK timber that is already being felled. So I've got some little props here of how we think about timber in the UK and kind of what happens to the timber. It's all right. Perfect, glamorous assistant from Jonathan. So one of the really important things we're thinking about when we're building with timber is actually how long that timber is going to last. Because if it takes 60 years for us to grow a tree, we need to make sure that that timber is actually then being used for a full 60 years. Otherwise, the carbon that's locked up in that timber is then actually being wasted again. So, for example, if it's biomass, it's probably going to last less than a year, turned into pellets, burned, the carbon goes back into the sky. And if we're using things like packaging and pallets, again, it's not going to last very many years, maybe a maximum of about 10 years. And similarly, things like fencing, they're not going to last very long. So construction is a real potential to lock up this carbon for a long time, at least 60 years, ideally, hopefully a lot longer than that. So by building with timber, we can actually lock that carbon away for a much longer time. So some of the other work we then did was looking at what's available and starting to produce a kind of product library of actually the kind of green things are what we actually currently make in the UK. Some of them at quite large scale, some of them at quite small scale. But these are potential things that we can already work with. And these are the kind of things that we started to focus on within our buildings as the kind of the key points that we can actually start to make change immediately. And then the kind of final key approach that we took is really looking at cascading reuse of timber. So it's a really vital resource that we have a limited amount of in this country and a limited capacity to produce. So the kind of really key part is using it as many times as we can during its lifespan. So if we can use it in a whole section, so we can use big chunks of trees for structural purposes, that's great. But if we can then reuse it by chopping it down and making it into things like OSB board, then that's even better, because we can then extend that lifespan again and potentially again and reuse that carbon multiple times. So we're locking it up in trees and then using it multiple times to give it this longest lifespan possible. So we started looking at our whole homes and the kind of key areas that we could focus on. And quite nicely, my element of the talk will tie together some interesting work that we've been doing with Tom at Basson and obviously with Block Build as well. So there's been a lot of kind of varied approaches to looking at different bits of the building. So how about can we make timber windows instead of plastic windows or aluminium windows? And then I think it'll probably be a good time to talk about the modifications that we've made to the Block Build system and how we've kind of started to work to include more timber within the whole system and reduce the amount of metal and high carbon products. So I'll pass over to Jonathan to talk a little bit more about that.
I've got my own microphone, I think, on my shirt. I don't know if it's working, but so it is working, good. So I will run through all the kind of, just the basics. and I'm happy to talk about this outside as well. But and there's another sample outside. So we're a digitally driven manufacturing system made out of an OSB cassette, which is made on a CNC machine. Really breaking it down, it's a one material cassette. We've been working with We Can Make on a sort of research project to try and take out the nail plates. These are nail plates, just, you know, they go on as part of the fixing. This is what we also used as a peg system, which basically goes in the cassette, brings one to the other, and the slightly tapered so it pulls it in. They're not actually produced in the UK, spruce ply. So we've now gone, and it is timber, but it's a reconstituted whole made out of 100% waste of timber production. So, and it's actually parts of the trees that wouldn't normally be used for anything, maybe just burnt. So we've now sort of engineered out, or we're testing these pegs, which are kind of like a bow tie shape. They knock into the face, and they sort of replace both this peg and the nail plate. So that's a new outcome of the project. I think in terms of retrofit, where the system fits, it's maybe not, you know, entirely, it's for building new houses, but we've done rooftop extensions, we've built on top of existing buildings where we've actually, instead of moving the customer out or the client out, we've built on top of their roof, and then we've taken the roof out afterwards so they can keep all the furniture under dust covers and actually live in there while it's still happening. It's entirely scalable as a system, so we've worked with We Can Make, and they made their elements of the first two houses here in the factory with the guys that were going to be living in them. We can make the cassettes as small or as big as the project sort of is suited to, and that's just by extending the panel sizes and either using manual installation or non-man, like, you know, cranes. Sustainable is on our kind of key, or sustainability is our sort of key objective in the way that we know how. So, you know, from a fabric first approach, looking at alternative insulations, using a one source material for everything, just keeps it super simple, and using sort of digital manufacturing processes which are pretty efficient and lean. Sorry, I'm reading from notes. You know, the system is a fully assured system, so it's certified with BOPAS, which is a quality management system, which stands for the Built Offsite Property Assurance Scheme. That basically enables lending, but also is warranty providers are more likely to lend to provide a warranty against it, and it gives the building a 60-year lifespan or 60-year life assurance against all of the kind of financial side. I think that's about it from me, really, on the sales pitch. But, you know, there's samples outside, and if any of that was unclear, I'm happy to go through it. So it's this one here, which is the OSB. So they're basically made of several panels, which, you know, you've got they're tessellated connections, so they're just pressed together and then screwed. The filler, which is the filler. This.
No, the filler in here. What's in the middle?
The insulation that's inside.
Yeah.
How does that stay together? Or
Glue, or what makes it stick together?
it's just we just put it in. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you mean the actual insulation?
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about the insulation.
So one of the things that we did as part of this research project was looking at how we could use timber-based insulation as well. So there's actually two blocks there. The lower one uses what was used previously, which was rock wool, which is a mineral fiber. So it's actually spun out of like superheated rocks. So obviously has quite a lot of carbon content in that process of heating the rocks up and spinning them. And that's a kind of it's similar to a kind of glass fiber bat that you might put in your loft, but it's a bit denser than that. And so we've been working with BOPAS, who are those kind of quality assurance providers, to basically make sure that we can use wood fibre insulation in the buildings and we can still get those same kind of sign-off and process. And the wood fibre insulation is actually really interesting in that there's some real simple benefits, like if you've ever worked with glass fibre insulation or Rockwool or anything, you have that horrible itchy feeling afterwards of all the tiny little cuts from the insulation itself, whereas the wood fibre is basically just a big fluffy block of sawdust. So it's a lot nicer to work with from that point of view, and from a whole bunch of other kind of microfibers in your lungs and all sorts of bits like that. And it's basically made from a process where the cellulose, which is a kind of component of the timber itself, actually can kind of lock together those different fibers and strands. So you don't have to add much, well, you don't have to add any extra glue. The only additive I think they use in most of the production is borax to stop insects and rodents eating it. So it's kind of locks itself together.
What about foam?
What about foam instead? Yeah, so that's one of the things that we've kind of looked at. It's very high carbon content in producing all of this plastic foam that's exclusively oil-based. You do get a better insulation performance from it, but the other downside of it is it's actually harder to install, especially rigid foam. And actually you'll see a lot of buildings that claim to have really good performance, and they'll have cut all these bits of foam up, and then you'll actually see they don't actually meet very well at all these angles. So there's actually loads of gaps between all of it. So one of the other benefits of this is it's a nice fluffy material that kind of slots into the cassette and fills up all those gaps around the outside, so you can kind of guarantee a really good fit, which really helps on site.
It actually comes in the sort of slab sizes as well, so it literally fits in the cavity that you're putting it in. Just as a starting point, from the very beginning, we just stayed away from sort of the foam insulations. So, and we're looking at all the insulation types and options, and really just the style of, or the method of manufacture and then assembly. It allows us to use any material. So we've used blow fill as well, which on bigger scale projects where we're installing and we've got bolted connections in big spanning floors, we're bolting those together, and then after we've done the installation, some contractors come round, put the tubes in and fill it up with the insulation. So that works quite well. There was a bit of a cap there, which is what we use for, I don't know if there's anything else that's going to fall off, which is what we use for the blow fill caps, but also access points for putting the bolted connections in, so that kind of just fits in, and then a membrane goes over that afterwards, and it's kind of all sealed up.
And you've got some headlines from the kind of the difference of all these kind of like, which sometimes feel like quite small modifications, but it actually adds up. So you've got the headlines on the savings. Do you want to share those?
Yeah, so we've just been kind of running some embodied carbon numbers, so the amount of carbon's actually locked up in the building itself, and versus the homes that we built the first time, we're looking at about a third of the amount of carbon that's actually being embodied in those buildings, which is kind of a fantastic saving. And in terms of like different criteria that it hits, it's like an A++ score. So it's like pretty much the best score you can get for a building, which is really exciting that we can actually achieve a building that locks up more carbon in its construction in terms of sequestration than it will emit in embodied emissions.
What is the membrane made out of?
Oh, the membranes that we use are breather membranes, which are plastic-based, but they're so thin that the quantity of plastic that's used is actually then kind of really small. That's one of the things that there's not really another approach that you can use. There are some breathable things, but you actually end up using more material and the carbon cost ends up higher. So
We've also used a liquid membrane, which is like a spray-applied VOC-free, almost like a rubberized membrane, and that goes on the internal and external faces. That's a bit quicker, but it's higher in cost.
And just before we go super geek out on membranes, we might save some of those conversations for after this session. But
yeah, maybe if there's any like general questions on the content, and then if not, feel free to grab any of us afterwards for like specific things.
Did you consider sheep's wool?
Yeah, we did. It's something that we've actually, along with like hemp insulation and a few others, have got approval for as well. But it's just that bit lower performing that you end up having to build bigger walls. So you actually often conversely end up using more carbon by building a bigger wall to fit more sheep's wool into it. So it's can be
Straw similarly, because you've got a bale of straw there.
Yeah, straw similarly, it doesn't actually help all that much. And straw works really well when it's used as a compressive material and you're actually building the structure into it, and that's where it's really successful. But if you're building a kind of a whole structure around it anyway, you end up again using more carbon than you would have otherwise.
We might save lots of questions for the end because
Yeah.
we're going to use the whole time for one
Yeah.
thing. And we've got loads of other speakers and loads of other good stuff. So round of
Who are we passing on to next?
passing it on to Tom next.
Cool.
And then we might be yeah. So Tom, it's really nice to have what we've been thinking about because we've been going exploring suppliers and foresters and all sorts of things. So what's really nice is to be able to introduce Tom from Baston Timber because he is one of the producers trying to make these things that we can then use in our homes. Nearly ready there?
So, right, is that, yep, that's working, I think. Good. Right, good morning. Quick intro then. My name's Tom Barnes, and I run a company called Baston Timber. I'm fourth generation family owner, so we're about 120 years old as a company. And we fit somewhere in that diagram up there. I can't really see it from here, but somewhere where the UK wood turns into hardwood and then goes to a sawmill somewhere in the middle. So is that a bit loud, is it? Turn that one off. So we, in the grand scheme of things, we're very small up there, but in the scheme of sawmills cutting up hardwood, we're quite big in the UK. But hardwood makes up a very small proportion. We've heard about the wood pellet issue. That is a massive proportion. And even actually to add to that, which is a fairly shocking statistic, is that of all the hardwood that we actually fell in this country, 85%, oh God, that's come, I'll shout anyway, 85% of that is burnt as well. So, by way of further introduction, I also, as well as running the company, I have a side project, which Melissa alluded to, which has turned into a big side project, which is that I'm at the moment putting the finishing touches to a national wood strategy that we're delivering to government in a few weeks. So this is all very, very topical for me, and there's still space for a bit of extra content in there if anyone has any burning issues that they want presented to the Minister for Forest before she disappears next year. Anyway, coming back to what we do, I suppose in terms of philosophy, our philosophy is to use local wood. And I like to try and do everything within a 100-mile radius if we can. Buy the trees, bring it to our sawmills, process it, sell it into buildings, all within that kind of perimeter. It doesn't always happen, but for the most part it does happen. So what I spend most of my waking day doing is trying to think of ways to get the wood that is in our woodlands into products that people actually want to buy to put into buildings. Because it's actually very easy to come up with theoretical ways that we can use all our wood, but there's often fundamental practical reasons as to why we don't and why we can't do it. So it's trying to kind of weave a way through that to find products that people do want at prices they're willing to pay, at qualities that are correct, but come out of our woodlands. Now, our woodlands in this neck of the woods are mostly filled with broadleaf trees, so mostly filled with oak, beech, ash, poplar, sycamore, bit of chestnut, bit of birch, bit of alder. But that's the majority of, and then you've got obviously some of the softwood plantations where we have some pines, some spruce, some cedar, some Douglas fir. These are all the species we work with. Now, in terms of a marketing philosophy, what we try and do is link in the consumer's head what they're buying with where it's come from. And get them to understand that by buying a piece of wood from America, the money's gone to America. You know, I'm sure it gets used well out there. Buying a piece of wood from this country, from one of the estates or one of the woodlands, at least 50% of the money is ending up back with the woodland owner. Without talking about it too much in percentages, but a big chunk, around 80% of the income of a woodland owner comes from selling wood in some form. The other 20% will be government grants, government subsidies and things. But without that money from selling the wood, there is not enough money to manage the woodland, to expand the woodland, to carry out the conservation practices that we want them to do. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, we shouldn't cut the trees down. We should just let nature take its course and look after the woodland. I hate to dispel the myth. It doesn't work. Okay? If woodlands are not managed, they fall into disrepair. We do not have any original woodlands. All of our woodlands are where they are because of us, humans. We either put them there for sporting reasons, for timber reasons, for pit props and furniture, or for leisure reasons. They're there because they have fulfilled a role, and they need to be managed, and management costs money. So our job, my job, is to find ways to be able to buy the wood off them and then sell it on. And obviously I can't buy it unless I can sell it. So we need to create products. So roll on. I'm going to focus on one product because it is the kind of tangible incarnation of everything we've tried to do. And it's a product called Brimstone. And it goes back to a number of conversations I had sort of 10 or so years ago in various groups along the lines of, how can we persuade people to buy more of the wood that we have in our woodlands? Because the furniture industry has gone, the mining industry has gone, we don't make matchsticks anymore, we don't do all the things we used to do with our wood. So how can we create markets for the wood? Lots of bonkers ideas came out of that, but one of them, and it wasn't my idea to be fair, was modification. Other countries are modifying their wood to change the structure to make it behave in a certain way. And this kind of rolled on a bit, and I thought, well, you know, it's probably not a bad idea, is it? And we've got a sawmill already, and we've got access to the wood, and we can kiln it, we can machine it. The only thing we can't do is modify it. But there were some friendly French people over the water that could do that and were willing to do it for us. So we started playing about, sending some wood, having it modified, and bringing it back. Before I roll on further, you're probably thinking, well, like, what's modification then? Now, modification, in its general term, just means you're changing the cell structure of wood all the way through the piece of wood. There's different ways of doing it. You may have come across products called, like one called Accoya, Kebony. These are examples of impregnation modification. What we do is a thermal modification, which in the simplest terms is we're cooking the wood. We're cooking the wood at a similar temperature to chicken, a nice roast chicken, about 210 degrees, but we're obviously not wanting the wood to catch fire in the process. So the whole process is about getting the wood up to a temperature of over 200 degrees without it catching fire, and then bringing it back down with a piece of wood still in good order. And by doing that, we are changing the structure of the wood. Now, in simple terms, there's a few things going on. One is that we're burning away the hemicellulose part. We've heard about cellulose this morning. This is the hemicellulose part, which is sugar. So sugar is food. Food is what the wood-eating fungi want to get in there and eat. So we're taking that away. We're also, hemicellulose is also effectively the bit that water bonds with. So when water gets into a piece of wood, it gets between the cell walls, bonds with these OH groups, and pushes the cells apart, and you get swelling. It comes back out, it shrinks and probably distorts a bit. So by taking that part away, you're taking the food away and also the ability for water to bond. So once we've thermally modified it, we've effectively got the durability because it's too dry and there's no food for the fungi. We've got stability because the water cannot bond and unbond as easily as it could with a natural piece of wood. So this here, well, here you go, before and after. This is a bit of ash, nice bit of English ash, which is lovely in its current form anyway, you know. But if you put it outside, it's going to rot, and it's going to move around a lot. And that is a piece of modified ash. Now, the other sort of fundamental thing about this is that a lot of the wood, particularly hardwoods that we use, and some of the softwoods, take a very, very long time to grow. So just a few examples. We used to import a lot of Canadian cedar over here, you know, used for cladding on buildings. That takes 300 to 400 years to grow, a tree like that. Even an oak tree in this country, put your arms around it, probably 200 years. Now, however you define the term sustainable, it is not sustainable to use more and more wood that takes hundreds of years to grow. We just won't have enough wood. And if demand is going to increase as is predicted, i.e. globally doubling consumption, we're just going to run out of wood, simple as that. So if we can take faster growing wood that doesn't have the qualities that we want and do something cool to it that doesn't involve lots of nasty chemicals to make it last as long and perform as well as slow growing wood, kind of makes sense. So a piece of ash that is lovely but no good for external use, and the colour has not been very fashionable in this country for some time. We like oak. And then just simply heat it and turn it into something that's durable, you can use it outside, nice and stable, and is also quite attractive. There's a market for that. And the market is predominantly at the moment cladding, which is quite popular, decking, which is still relatively popular. And then also we've been talking, we can make about windows. I mean, I've got them in my house made of this. They work fine. We're talking about other uses like the internal layer of engineered flooring instead of plywood. I'm talking to street furniture companies. So there's all sorts of applications for it. In terms of species, I mean, this is ash. We're also doing it with poplar as well. And I'll just hand a few bits around actually when I'm talking. This is a little interesting before and after set. There's a couple of bits of ash there in different forms. And that's a bit of poplar. And if you get the poplar in your hand, you feel how light it is. Really, it's waterlogged, it's fluffy, it's unstable, it's a kind of pasty, yellowy, grey colour. There's nothing really redeeming about it, other than it makes good matchsticks. But put it through the modification process and it comes out beautifully silky, perfect machine finish, super lightweight. It's kind of everything you want it to be for a cladding product. So for me, that's the closest thing to alchemy I've come across when, in terms of producing timber. What else is there? So, yeah, I mean, what we've attempted to do, so this goes back to 2015. Since then, it's really been a case of just trying to tick off every box. So we get asked an awkward question I can't answer, and we go away and try and tick that off. So we've gone through the process of doing an EPD to find out what the carbon footprint is, and you get a number at the end, and you go, okay, is that good or bad? I don't really know, but we have a number. We've done the research in terms of the durability, the structural qualities of the wood. So we know it pretty well now. And really for us, in fact, I'm not even going to try and do a sales job because my problem is I can't produce it quickly enough, and we have a massive backlog of orders. So the demand is there. It's just a case of now scaling it up. And then testing other species as well to see what we can do, and then trying to work out what else we can do with the product. But for me, this encapsulates the way we need to think about using wood, and we've had this conversation that the way it tends to happen at the moment is specifications get written, and they get really written for oak from America or from Europe or some other timber, and then someone goes, but it'd be really nice if we could use English timber for this. I give you absolutely no time at all to produce it, get it ready or anything, and then the contractor goes, well, that's not possible, we can't do it. It's about, for us, it's about creating the products. For the designers out there, it's about thinking about that right at the early stage, not okay, what would I like it to look like? Well, what have we got? What does it look like? And how can we use that aesthetic, that quality, because not all timber comes with no knots in, clearly. How can we use that quality and that look and the grade and whatever else it is, and then use that within the building? It has to start right at the beginning. And even better than that, I mean, I always try and persuade big landowners to think far enough ahead so that we can use their trees, turn it into something to go back into their buildings. And we do it with some organisation. I mean, the Crown Estate is actually quite good at that. and we're frequently processing their wood for their projects. And that, you know, that is then a lovely story. We're trying to do it with the National Trust, but it's a big beast of an organisation. That. Right, sorry, I'm done anyway, I'm waffling. So, anyway, I'll be around later. So, yeah. Right.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. That's amazing. And we are super excited about working with Tom and this beautiful material. Honestly, it's like chocolate, isn't it? It's like wonderful stuff. And yeah, if we could start manufacturing windows here, then we can use that in our homes. Using dieback ash, how beautiful is that? Using also waste product and then make something that can work in the new homes, and then also work in retrofitting kind of existing homes as well. So we're super excited about that and the potential for local manufacturing. And now introducing Tim from Raise the Roof. Tim's a fab co-conspirator and experimenter and all sorts of things. And I'm not going to introduce you anymore because you can introduce yourself and explain some of the adventures that you've been on. But
okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I've got a few slides which none of you will be able to see because they're too small, but it sort of just helps me to know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I work for a social enterprise called Wessex Community Assets, and for about 20 years we've been working on community housing, so in particular community land trusts, and I'm also a researcher at Plymouth University, so I'll talk a bit about that as well. So particularly over the last 10 years we've been working across Devon, Dorset and Somerset with about 50 or 60 communities, developing community land trust initiatives. And it's been, on the one hand, sort of quite successful. Lots of houses have been built, but most of those projects have been done in partnership with housing associations, and that's a whole another story. It's to do with the funding that you can get from Homes England. But housing associations are very constrained in terms of the designs that they are able to work with and the materials that are used. And so we got a bit frustrated with this, not with the housing associations, but just kind of felt that we were a bit locked in a system that doesn't allow you to bring in materials from regenerative forestry or agriculture. So we set up a parallel project called Raise the Roof, which is centred on the Bridport area, and which is where I live. And Bridport's quite interesting because we've already got quite an interesting mix of community housing projects, some quite old, some very recent. So for example, the finishing touches are just being put to the largest affordable co-housing project in Bridport, 53 homes, really interesting project. And the common house is currently being built by a combination of volunteers through courses and a few local tradespersons as well. Really interesting project. But basically, with Raise the Roof, we were trying to ask this question. We want affordable housing, but we want that affordable housing to draw on materials that come from local or bioregional regenerative agriculture and forestry. And that's really difficult because there's a missing middle. So we don't have the ability to, I mean, I'll talk about growing the stuff, that's quite difficult, but actually processing that material once you've got it is very difficult. And I've got ideas about how we deal with that, but anyway, that's one of the areas that we've been looking at. So the Raise the Roof project, yeah, essentially we take a lot of inspiration from We Can Make, in that we want this process to actually generate local jobs, generate local infrastructure. We don't want to be producing materials that are then sent off hundreds of miles and then shipped back. We want to rebuild that local infrastructure. Bridport is quite interesting because it still has an industry of rope and net making, and traditionally that rope and net was made from hemp, and then sails were made from flax. So we have farmers locally who remember their grandparents talking about growing these materials, and that's been a real kind of factor in persuading them to try and experiment again with this stuff. But unfortunately, all the machinery that was used to actually process hemp is either redundant or was shipped off to Portugal. So we don't have it locally. So we've got this big problem. Okay, so materials pyramid. Obviously, you all know that we want to go down the pyramid into materials that have a low embodied carbon. And so that got us interested in, first of all, in timber. So about 6 years ago, we got some funding through the lottery to do some work on the potential. You know, what are the existing local materials that we could be using, like straw, for example, or timber, but what are other materials like hemp that we could also be exploring? So that kind of started us off. As I say, hemp, we have this wonderful heritage locally. And we managed to persuade 5 farmers locally to grow hemp. We got some funding from it's called the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty team. So they have a thing called the Farming in Protected Landscapes program. So that basically de-risked it for the farmers so that we were able to do these field trials. We're in the 2nd year of those field trials. There's a wonderful documentary that some local young filmmakers made. I'll put the link at the end. And so we've been growing hemp. And it's been a really interesting process. The bale that you can see here is a bale of hemp. And I passed around these strands. If anybody at the back wants some strands, we'll pass these back. But essentially, hemp is quite an interesting material or product. So this is quite a short stem of hemp that I picked about a month ago. We still haven't harvested the current crop this year. It goes higher than that. And what's really interesting about it is it grows in about 3 to 4 months. And so it sequesters carbon much quicker than trees. I mean, we love trees as part of our projects. We manage an old coppice, which has ash and has hazel in it. So we're very interested in trees. But as people have been saying, we can't build 300,000 houses a year from timber. And so we need other ways of generating those woody materials that have a high embodied carbon. And hemp is really interesting. So if you take your little bit of hemp, you can do a quick manual decortication process. So essentially hemp has fiber on the outside. The fiber is what was used for rope and net. And on the inside, you have this woody core. And so if you start breaking, so this is what the machines did, the decortication machines. They would basically break the fiber from the woody core. And what you would end up with is basically a tiny tree. It's the same material, really. And what again is really interesting about hemp and the woody core in the hemp is that it's full of tiny little air pockets. And whatever you do, it's very difficult to crush. These are called sheaves or herds. You can't really crush them. Whereas if you take something like straw, and straw is a really interesting material to build with, but the problem with straw is that if you compress a straw, you lose the air. Whereas if you use this, actually, you don't lose that air pocket. So it's really interesting. So that's essentially what you get. We have very few plants in this country that can actually do this decortication. The biggest one is in East Yorkshire Hemp, and they produce this product, Hemp Build. And the most common way of then dealing with that has been to mix it with lime. So if anyone wants to come and have a look at this. So this is, it's called hempcrete. And so it's a very interesting material, but one of the problems with lime is that making lime, it has a very high embodied carbon. So there's a bit of a kind of dissonance there where you're saying we want a low carbon material, but you're using lime as a binder. So at Plymouth University, they've been developing through a project called Cobbage, a new cob material, and they tested lots of different kind of woody materials that they would mix with the clay, and they found that hemp was the best for getting the U values in the cob, which meant you could have narrow walls. So in talking to the Cobbage project, they said, stop using lime. You've got loads of clay in West Dorset, where we've got clay everywhere. Why don't you start experimenting with that? So just a bit more about what we've done. We've been working a bit with some national architects called Assemble. The initial piece of work that we did was around, how do we design affordable housing using natural materials like timber and hemp and clay. Then we got some funding through, I was very proud of this actually, it was from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. I've never got money from something like that. I thought, yes. And what it was we were very inspired partly by what we can have done using CNC machines, but we also, in West Dorset, the Architectural Association have a college called Hook Park, and at Hook Park they use digital design and fabrication techniques. They're in a 300-acre wood. It's an amazing place to visit. You can just go and walk around, but they design and build incredible buildings, and they try as much as possible to use timber in its natural form. So rather than taking a tree that's round and then chopping it up and discarding maybe a third of it, they're trying to use as much of that timber, because, I mean, Tom will know that timber in the round has more structural integrity than when you start chopping it up. So we were very inspired by that. So we just asked that question, what happens if you start to mix up natural materials with digital design and fabrication? So again, it was very much experimentation. All of this is experimentation, but you've got to do something. So we had run a course for local people. One of the challenges with community-led housing, most of the time it's not really community-led, it's sort of community-oriented or community-inspired. And the community doesn't really get their hands dirty. That's, again, why we can make us inspiring. So we started running courses for unemployed people, making tiny houses, so that you could get the skills, but you could also have something usable after 2 or 3 weeks. So in the beginning, we used wood fibre insulation, imported from Germany, wood fibre board, again imported from Germany, and local Western red cedar. We have a really interesting guy locally who provided us with lots of interesting wood. So we already had a structure, and then we needed a new roof, basically. So with the Fab Lab at Plymouth University, we designed some new roof trusses using plywood, and basically, again, experimented. How could we connect these plywood trusses to our existing material thing? So that was the first one. But then we started saying, and this is not a critique of something like block build. I mean, we're very keen on those kind of systems, and we're currently talking to WikiHouse about another project. But for example, if you take ash is a wonderful wood, but ash has dieback disease, and they say that we could lose how many million trees? Pretty much all. 200 million?
No one knows.
No one knows. The figure that is, the figure that is put around is 200 million ash trees. So what you don't want to do is then burn all of those ash trees. The question is, how do you lock up that ash? And that's why something like this thermally modified timber is so exciting, actually. So what we did in our particular experiment was we wanted to make prefabricated hemp, initially hempcrete panels, but we didn't want to use plywood or OSB. We wanted to use ash. And so we worked with another company called Tyler Hardwoods, which is in the southwest. We have colleagues who run a makerspace called Wood Lab down in Totnes. It's a specialist timber makerspace, very similar to the factory, really inspiring. Go online and be inspired by that one. So basically from Tyler Hardwoods, we got the wood, we took it down to the makerspace, we planked it up, and then we, as I say, we were sort of inspired by what people are doing with prefabricated hemp panels. And so we started playing with putting the ash planks that we had made onto the CNC machine. So the idea was that we would then be able to do all the jointing on the corners and put them together. So this was us, yeah, as I say, playing around with ash and making these panels. Interestingly, it would have been better if they were thermally modified, because we then made the panels and we started filling them with different mixes, but obviously ash doesn't really like moisture, and so you have to find a way to dry it out as quickly as possible. Otherwise, that moisture from the mix in the middle is going to get soaked up by the ash. So actually, thermally modified wood would be much better. But you know, this was last year, so we didn't know about that. That's an example of one of the panels that we made, and we started experimenting with how to get the mix to sort of stick to the sides as well. And then what that then led us into was this, and I can pass this round. This is quite heavy. But this is another fun thing to do. This is something that we made as part of the sort of filling up these prefabricated panels. So this is local clay, and do you want to pass that one around? The little block, we went to the local agricultural show and we had about 100 kids queuing up, making blocks, and then they made a little house from them. So it's a really nice thing to do to get people thinking about local materials. But the other one that I'm going to pass round, so this one's quite crumbly. These were ones that we made a couple of weeks ago with some students from EPFL in Lausanne. It's another architecture school. And so this was using local clay to make bricks. And so this has a much lower amount of hemp in it, but you'll see how heavy it is. It's not been fired. And so, as I say, we're really interested in how you can really get to know your local materials, like clay. It's such a resource. And then that combination of timber, hemp, what's the optimum, I suppose, for that? And so the last thing to say is, because this is a retrofit session, we're really interested in retrofit. We've got some funding through the Design Observatory, something called a Design Exchange Partnership. And so we're working with Plymouth University. There's a building, an old youth hostel in Bridport that we want to look at refurbishing. We're talking to the housing association that owns that at the moment. So we don't have the answers, but we're sort of just really keen to experiment. That's where people like We Can Make or Plymouth University come in. But we do think that there's a real opportunity to go from, it just seems so ironic, to retrofit buildings using materials that are oil-based or incredibly, you know, really high embodied carbon. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, there feels like there's a nice mega project that's going to come out of this that includes Brimstone, includes what you're doing down in Wessex, and includes We Can Make. It's all going to happen. A nice shout out for Future Observatory, who are in the house just over there. Justin's going to be talking later. Hooray! And then last up in this session, we've got Florence Collier from Humblebee, who's going to share some of your adventures in retrofit. And I think what's really magical about what Florence is doing is, one of the really magical things that Florence is doing is like working also through her own practice on her own home and working at the scale of the home, and then also working at the scale of the neighbourhood as well. So we've got you loaded up actually already. So yeah. While you get your mic on, I'll find your screen.
Yeah. You can do it, wherever. Best if you do it somewhere there.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then you can pop that in your pocket or on your belt. And that's great.
And I'm ready to go. Oh my goodness.
The live stream shot at the moment.
Oh gosh. Oh wow, what a vibe today. It's amazing. I'm so pleased to be here.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about my own retrofit. This is what the house looks like at the moment. I'm a passive house designer. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I've been working in the field of sustainability for maybe 15, 20 years now. So yeah, it's great to actually start implementing some of the stuff that I've been accumulating over the years. So that was actually what the house looked like. Sorry, I'm now in the way. The reason we embarked on this project, originally we wanted to find a community that we could co-live with, so Lilac was our sort of dream project. But shopping around, looking around for land, that kind of thing, it all became a little bit tricky. So I was in the middle of doing the Passive House course, and we touched on the Passive House for Retrofit standard called Retrofit, and we were designing sort of the ideal layout and still having an eye out on the market. Suddenly I saw this house and the layout looked exactly like a passive house. And I thought, I can Retrofit this. So we jumped at the chance to get it. And it's a great location for where we live. And embarked on, I guess now it's a 5-year journey, because I set up Humblebee 5 years ago when I qualified as a passive house designer. So, and through that time, I mean, when you do the Passive House course, there's a lot of emphasis on energy efficiency and operational carbon. So a lot of early passive houses are based on plastic materials, but having run a local plastic-free campaign, I knew both the impacts on the planet and in terms of disposal and recycling, and also on our health. Of using such materials, so it was very much from the outset, we're going to try and use natural bio-based materials as much as possible. There is no magic answer. There's always going to be compromise, especially if resources are limited. And I'm a big believer in using the right material for the right job. So there are bits of plastic in this retrofit, but equally, we're talking about extending the life of the building and extending it for the future and making it fit for the future. It started out, I mean, you can spend a lot of time planning, analysing, doing the calculations. Eventually you just got to start. There's a psychological barrier that it's all too difficult, and there will be some pretty low lows. Including falling through the ceiling. Luckily, I had a soft landing, my daughter's bed. My daughter was on a Zoom, it was lockdown actually, she was on a Zoom dance lesson at the time. And she said, I've got to go, my mum's fallen through the roof. So that was a bit of fun, especially as we'd spent most of lockdown telling the children not to do risky things, because we're not going to A&E. So yeah, that was the first hurdle. Speaking of hurdles, what we did was very much like this, was insulate between the joists of the loft with wood fibre, and we chose wood fibre because it does sort of pressure fit between the wood. Although I had been researching these materials, I'm so glad to have been playing around with the hemp actually, because originally I'd based everything on using hemp as one of the most sustainable materials we could possibly grow in the UK. So we had wood fibre between the joists and then 2 layers of hemp fleece, which actually, I mean, it's incredible that you can get from something so rough to something so soft without the sort of sheep's wool kind of greasiness that you might expect from a fleece. So that was just a really lovely material to work with, because that's the other thing. not only are you using natural materials, it's a joy to work with. So, and all the builders that start using wood fibre and hemp and all that kind of thing, they all say the same things, like, I would much prefer to use this, this material. So eventually people will catch on. So yeah, got over the first stage, and having done all the calculations, we were going to insulate the cavity. And this is where maybe you might have to compromise on principle. We went for an EPS, a grey EPS bead. What you don't want is moisture wicking up through the from the soil. So it's hydrophobic. There's also a foam, but it's probably, yeah, it will have a similar performance. And that already brings the U value of the wall up to something somewhere decent, and probably the last set of regulations, building regulations. We then, so that's just a cavity fill. If you're unsure as to whether your cavity is filled, you can look for the sort of holes, the drill holes. They're every 1.5 meters apart in the mortar, and that's how you can tell. And if you're unsure as to whether your wall is solid wall or a cavity wall, it's usually the brick pattern. So all long bricks means there's probably a cavity. If it's short brick and long brick, then it's probably solid wall. So just if you're doing your own. We had to go through a bit of a planning process because we're changing the materials of the building. In some constituencies, you don't necessarily have to do that. It's just in Cheshire East, they default to the national planning policy framework, and if you're changing there's plenty of permitted development, like extending, but if you're changing some of the construction materials, you need to go through the process. And so I did some noddy sketches. It's quite strange having a mind's eye vision and then doing a sketch. It never really quite looks like that in reality, and sometimes it looks better, so you might be pleasantly surprised. Part of the insulation strategy was to have triple glazed windows and timber frames. These are green building store ones, and they open inwardly, which works for a retrofit because then you can put the external insulation right up against the frame. And it helps with air tightness, in the air tightness test, but also obviously in the long term. What else can I say about those? Yes, so the other thing you might have noticed is we went from several panes to quite a lot fewer, because a lot of the heat escapes from the frame itself. So if you've got triple glaze, the glazing is actually quite good insulation, but if you've got frame, or mainly frame, a lot of the heat escapes through that frame. So yeah, so we've just got the one openable part in every room, and then a big large window that this is southwest facing, so you get free heat gain in this. Oh, sorry. In terms of materials then, we've got external wood fibre, 2 layers, a little bit of plastic through in the nylon dowels, but I know that there's lots of things happening with timber dowels. Even Rotherblast do timber dowels, so there's ways of doing timber that way. And then we had so lime render as the finish, that's your weather protection, and but we did want to sort of break up the sort of blocky look with a bit of timber, which comes from a local garden actually. So friends of ours are urban tree management people. They were they now process wood. They didn't used to, but this is from a deodar cedar. Where is it? The cladding here. From a local garden, and then also all the window boards were a deodar cedar. And one tree of heaven, which sounded quite nice. These were bespoke shutters, so because it's southwest facing, we have to control some of the solar coming in. I'm half French, half Italian, so I'm used to having external shutters and I like it, and so that was the last thing to be done. And then our next adventure, well, it's just happened over the summer and I'm currently kitchenless, is the floor, and we've gone for an earth floor. So yeah, I'm sorry, I would have brought the cookie, but it was all a bit hectic. But yeah, it's very much a smoother version of this, I guess. And yeah, if you've got any questions after that, happy. You can see a lot of it on my blog, and I've tried to be as transparent as possible with costs and everything, because the point of doing this work is to get people started, have the information, and also it's very cathartic, writing about your trials and tribulations. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get the NFIT certification?
I haven't got it, no. I'm working towards the actual targets. The airtightness target is going to be the hardest. I've still got to think about the loft floor, so the ceiling, and making sure that's pretty airtight, and I'll see what I get. But yeah. The good thing about NFIT is you do get a standard that's measurable. You get external people that will certify it for you. At the moment, it's not my priority, but if you wanted to sell it on as an NFIT house, it could be yours. So, yeah. Thank you very much.
Ooh, round of applause. If you want to stay there, I just want to invite the other speakers just to come back up and then think about questions that you might want to ask, and we'll try and scoop them up. Oops, there we go. We might just share around the microphone. So any questions or things that you want to kind of offer from your own practice? I know there's a lot of know-how in the room. Yeah.
I had a quick question for you.
Yes.
Two types of insulation, one cavity and one external wall.
Yes.
So did you do them both on the same wall, or was it for different
walls? Yeah, all the walls. So this is a detached, all cavity construction. We filled the cavities, and then we applied the external wall insulation so that we had the full U value that we were aiming for. Yeah.
Brilliant. Might take a couple at a time. Yep.
We're building 20,000 new houses a year. It's sort of two-tack this. And we have woodland owners who have woods that were probably planted 60 years ago. And that probably means they've got the wrong tree in their wood because something's changed since then. We don't need pit props and we don't need beech furniture, for example. And I just want to know how we connect small woodland owners who have hundreds, if not thousands of acres locally, to people like everyone here to use this timber, not just ash and, I'm talking about beech and cypress and other things that are oodles of it everywhere. That just nothing's been done with it.
Cool. I'm just going to take a few questions at a time. That was a question about how do we connect up all the small supplies of timber in the country to kind of projects like this. Another question?
Also about timber for Tom.
Yep.
You said that you've got a backlog of demand. Is the issue that there's a lack of timber coming to you, or you can't process it in your kiln fast enough?
Cool. So a question about supply or processing capacity. And final question here. And I'm looking out for a woman to ask a question next. A woman.
Timber again. Around here in particular, there's just tons and tons of ash, and the local authorities are busy
cutting it down around roads everywhere all the time. Does anybody know if anything useful is being done with that? Because my perception is that it's not.
Great. And that's a question about how would you do about dieback ash, and then
What energy was used to produce that piece of ash?
okay. All right, and there's two people asking about what energy was used to produce the brimstone. Okay, right. Tom, I think it's over to you.
Right. Start at the beginning. There's no easy answer to that. It's a nice idea. Practically, it's not a very easy thing to do. Of course, there are examples where people will bring a sawmill to the woods, a mobile sawmill. They'll cut some planks up. People can use it for their own houses. At scale, it's just not practical. So even for us, we're quite small. We can't afford to go out and pick up a tree. For me to hire a log lorry, just as an example, £600 for the day. So I've got to pick up full loads of logs, and ideally a few full loads of logs from one place. So that one place needs to actually have some capacity. I also can't, I try as much as I can to use what's there, but I can't deal with kind of one log of cypress, one log of something else, and try and find markets, because you need a certain volume to create a product, to invest in the machinery, to process it, to then market it, and then go to an architect who says, well, next year I've got a project where I want 1,000 square meters. Can you do it? I'm like, well, I don't know, because I don't know. I need to know that there's a volume of something coming through. So I think at a small scale there's opportunities, but at a larger scale, and it comes back to this chart up here, we do need to think sensibly about what we want to build with, and then what we need to plant now for the next generation. Now there's an argument around Sitka spruce, just that word makes some people kind of twitch a little bit, but that is what we use in this country to build timber frame. It is the only species that we can mechanically strength grade to C16 to build with. No other species can we do it for. So one argument is we should plant more Sitka spruce, but if you're coming at it from the resilience point of view, we should be diversifying. And that is playing a big part in the other piece of work I'm doing to try and balance off those two sides. But we do need to think sensibly about, starting at the beginning, what do we want, what can we use in the future, and then also what wants to grow in this country, what looks like it's going to be more resilient, where's, the provenance, where do we get it from? It's quite complicated. Probably I jump to yours on the ash front. I mean, we're trying as hard as we can. We're buying oodles and oodles of ash, but I still see lorries disappearing for firewood, thinking, well, I could use that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. The problem is that with energy prices up, the demand for firewood's gone through the roof, and so really most of the ash that's come down has been swallowed up by the increased demand for firewood. But we're trying. Tyler Hardwoods was mentioned. They're trying. But there's only so many sawmills in the country that can actually process it, and we have a capacity. And we probably, I don't know, in the last year we've maybe processed 2,000 cubic meters. It sounds a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing really. Energy. Well, I have bought and paid for 140 kilowatts of solar on the roof. I'm damned if I can get the thing to connect with my modification plant through an inverter, so we're just having arguments at the moment, but it will be, to a large extent, powered by solar, certainly during the day, and then beyond that, electricity.
So it was a specific question, how much to produce?
Well, okay, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well,
can you hear me? Not very well. So Imi at the start said we should
Go up a bit.
sorry, we should love people but maybe question the ideas. And I think we have a problem in this country, and I think it's a problem around the sort of discourse we use. And it's a discourse around things like scale and a discourse around innovation. And from my perspective, I think if we're going to have the sort of transition that you need by 2026, 2030, certainly by 2050, what we actually need is sensible industrial strategies that link things like that shift to a zero carbon construction sector or bioregional economies. And I think if we stick with the discourse around innovation and scale, what we're going to get is just bigger and bigger plants, maybe one in the country, dealing with stuff. And we're not going to deal with these other issues around local employment or, you know, keeping money circulating locally. So, you know, we've tried to get money. We've got some money, you know, from various sources. But for example, the Forestry Commission, their funding is focused at innovation. Actually, we don't need innovation. We know what needs to be doing. For example, around hemp, you know, we know that we could put in a decortication plant for Dorset for £250,000. But the government would say, well, that's not innovative and it's not a big enough scale. And so I think we really have to challenge this notion that things can only operate. We have a missing middle. That's what I think. And we need to find ways to have distributed networks of manufacturers, primary producers that work together at a more bioregional scale. That's my view.
Just really quickly, do a little shout out for Hester's workshop this afternoon. Hester runs Cloud Forest, which is a kind of effort to actually do a lot of this joining up between different elements. So please go to that 3 o'clock in the media centre in the Western Room.
Yeah, good shout out. This is going to be the last round of questions. Anyone who's a woman gets right to the top of the queue for this one. And new questions persons as well also get promoted as well. I can see a hand up there.
I just wanted to know, with the timber, how does it differ to shooting down? Not that kind of modification when you're doing it in the labs. What's the kind of difference with that?
So that is just that Shusugi ban is literally just burning the surface. So the principle is kind of similar, that actually you're effectively thermally modifying the surface of it. The problem with it is that it does actually just come off. So you're creating carbon on the surface, but that does wash off. So then you've got to then recoat it to basically stick it to the wall. But the principles are the same, is that extreme heat changes the cell structure, changes the relationship with water, and makes the piece of wood more durable. But it's something that became very fashionable a few years ago until people realised it washed off the wall.
Be very patient there.
No, 2 questions there, and one to Lee. Has the house gone up, the price value of the work?
Oh yeah, get to the crunch of it, all right.
By virtue of its location, probably,
By
yes.
location.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question, why don't we make more clothes out of hemp? So I've got hemp jeans. Does it mean it's expensive? Anyone got hemp?
It comes back to that missing middle. It comes back to this missing middle. We're working with, there's a really interesting organisation from the States called Fibershed that's trying to promote these kind of, you know, bioregional things, and they're looking at these whole issues around how do you not just cultivate, but how do you also process. So there's also now a Southwest Fibershed, a Northwest Fibershed, and those are the issues that we're looking at. How do we cultivate it? I mean, I could talk for an hour about the challenges of actually harvesting the hemp. It's really difficult. And then you've got to decorticate it, but you've got to do that in a way that leaves the fibres in a good condition so that you can then turn it into textiles. And again, we've lost all of that. We had it, we don't have it. So it sort of comes back to this thing about innovation. It's not about innovation, it's about whether we want that industry in this country or not, or do we just want to ship everything, you know, to somewhere else. Might be good for that somewhere else, but it's certainly not good for jobs locally.
I mean, maybe we can, I mean, this is what We Can Make is all about. It's trying to grow that infrastructure so we can actually hang on to this stuff as community wealth rather than distribute it elsewhere. So maybe we can call the process of growing the missing middle innovation. Maybe that can get us some funding. Right.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that, simply because I think there is a missing middle. We don't have, you know, in Germany they call it the Mittelstadt. You know, it's that middle ground of engineering, making stuff. And we have lost that. But I would push back and say that you do need a bit of scale, because, you know, all of this equipment is so expensive to buy. And so, you know, the investment you need to do any of this stuff is huge. So unless you've then got the throughput, a bit of scale. I'm not saying, you know, I totally agree that what we don't want is one massive plant for something somewhere in the country and everything gets delivered. But you do need to have enough scale, even at on a regional basis. Even what we do, you know, we need enough scale to make the whole thing hang together. to be able to afford to invest, to afford to employ, and all the other things that go with it. So it is finding that balance, and it is a middle. You know, it is that kind of middle ground where there's enough scale, but it's also regional or even local where possible.
So just but just to add to that, you know, if you look at somewhere like France, the government has stepped in and said, for example, that public buildings should have natural materials within them. So again, if we don't have the markets, we don't get the middle. It's not just the, you know, you can't push a supply chain. It's that classic thing. It has to be pulled to a great extent. And so this is where we need sensible, you know, industrial strategy, and we don't have it.
Just one more there is a piece of work actually just coming to fruition called the Timber into Construction Roadmap, which DEFRA will be presenting soon. I fear that they're going to water it down to the point where it's a bit pointless, but the gist of it is right, and it is about how do we get more timber into buildings, and you know, literally where do we put it, what do we use, where's it going to come from, all the nuts and bolts.
Right, final question. You're wrapping up, like make it a good one, yeah? Going to be a good one.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on that. I'm Diana from Wood Knowledge Wales. I'm loving all of this, so thank you so much for all the speakers. Timber industrial strategy in Wales as well, something to watch out for. The government has been backing up a lot the use of timber. However, I wanted to ask you as well, Tim, your experience with housing associations. There is a lot of policy blocks that allow housing associations, especially for social housing, to use all these innovative materials. So even though in Wales we have the innovative housing projects, the ORP scheme, which is optimized retrofit projects, there's a lot of policy blocks that, and then it's also this disjointed thinking from forestry, manufacturing, and construction. And even though, like, our bubble at the moment is Wales, we wanted to work with England, Scotland, the world, but you know, that we have to start somewhere. And even there, where we have a lot of this support, there's still a lot of, you know, the politics behind it. So what's your experience, especially in social housing? How are you getting these materials to actually get through the planning process?
So the simple answer is no. And I should have said, you know, when I was talking about the lack of industrial strategy, actually, if you look at Wales or you look at Scotland, your streets ahead, and we need to be learning from Wales. So it's fantastic that you're here.
Yeah, definitely playing catch up with Wales, definitely. I said final question, and this is the final question. Make it a really good one.
Big focus on natural materials and modern, and there's early stage planning for manufacture of a similar structure to that, but different shapes as well, which has got the dense packed straws. Please don't dismiss straw. It doesn't burn. It's phenomenal.
Cool.
Big fan of hemp and timber. Please don't dismiss straw.
Okay, that was a big shout out for straw. Yeah, we're definitely here for straw as well. That's very good. So yeah, that's a wrap on that kind of talk. I think what's really powerful, all of this and all of you are kind of system demonstrators for what's possible and showing. And like, we might be small, but together we're bigger. But you know, we do also need to make those calls on government to be an activist government to help make the market and try and drive these things through. So yeah, think that kind of through. We're going to kind of wrap now, but if this is kind of provoked an idea, or you've got something that you wanted to share but you haven't been able to do it here, we've got a tree, very appropriately a tree that's on the table where the fruit is, and there's some little labels that you can go and kind of put some things on there. It'd be lovely if that wasn't a leafless tree anymore by the end of lunch and it had some other lovely ideas on it. And then there are, yes, Hester, do you want to say a little 2 words about your workshop?
Yes, if you're interested in connecting the dots.
Yeah, sure.
Then we'll be at the media centre, 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock for a booking discussion across sectors along the supply chain.
It's great. I think brilliant. Right, round of applause for everyone. Thank you so much.
Sorry to be this guy, especially to the live stream. Enjoy your lunch wherever you are. But when we come out of here, if we can just spread out across the building as much as possible for about 10-15 minutes while the lunch is placed out, and just give the team a couple of minutes to make sure that's all out. And then those who are least able to queue for long, let them go first, please, and then get your food. Thank you so much.
Go outside, it's really nice.
That was great. That was really nice. Doing it's amazing. Yeah, sorry.
Hello, welcome back. Hope you've had some nice food. So I'm Melissa from We Can Make. Hello again. So this session, I'm just going to ask, could we, hello, that's better, isn't it? Hi. So yeah, Melissa from We Can Make. Hope you've had a nice lunch. And now we've got a session where we're going to be sharing some stuff we've been doing around front garden retrofit kits. So, does that sound weird? It sounds a bit weird to me. Sound all right for you? Everyone all right? Okay, we'll keep good with it. Okay. So it's kind of a kind of question about where retrofit starts, and it tends to kind of start the conversation by kind of like whole houses or whole tower blocks, and that's quite an intimidating scale to start any conversation at. So we're trying to think about, okay, how do we make this more human? How do we make it more relatable? And how can it connect into the everyday rhythms of the neighbourhood and the knowledge there as well. And it's going to also kind of starting in a point when we know in our neighbourhood of Knowle West, some of the infrastructure there is kind of being maybe adapted in ways that possibly aren't that helpful for the climate emergency. So for example, our front gardens, over 30% of those front gardens have been paved over and turned into car parks essentially. So we kind of started with a question to see how we could do something different around that. And asking instead, so how could our front yards become part of the shared ecological and social infrastructure of the neighbourhood? And what might be the kind of kit or props or process or conversations that might be able to kind of turn that around? So we began a collaboration with Better Block in Dallas, Texas, who are very cool. Check them out, definitely Google them. And they work at the kind of neighborhood block scale, using kind of temporary installations and painting kind of paved roadways and using temporary furniture to take over places to transform them. And they've got some really powerful stories about places that are ridden with kind of gun crime becoming really kind of social spaces. And we kind of wanted to take some of that energy and see how we could apply that in our neighborhoods. And so we began to develop, could we develop a kind of flat pack, something we could make easily and manufacture here, a kind of kit that people could begin to use to reoccupy their front gardens for social and ecological purposes, which is where we kind of began to invent these things. And then we co-designed that with some of our community members here in Knowle West. And we did a little experiment installing them with 2 neighbors who tried it out. And then they kind of like, almost like the real excitement of the story kind of began when we began sharing it with other people. And then this is what this talk is really about, is that sharing process and what began to happen then. So now I'm going to hand over to Daniel.
Hey everyone. My name's Daniel. I'm one of the co-founders at Civic Square, and we're based in Birmingham. And our work has really been about looking at what infrastructure we can create in neighborhoods to kind of enable neighbors, people, local residents to kind of lead the transitions of many different types, whether it's a social, ecological, etc. And we were really just inspired by a lot of the work that's been happening here already in Bristol and We Can Make and the community-led housing, and then on to thinking about the front gardens and the connections with Better Block, some of the work we'd already been kind of doing around involving people in co-building and making interventions in their neighbourhoods. This kind of front garden kit package was really interesting to us, particularly at the point in the work that we were, like this year, we were looking to start to actually deeply demonstrate ways that people could work together on their streets to kind of build towards transition and of their streets and their homes. So earlier on this year in March, I think we reconnected with Melissa, and she was telling us about that question of like how our front gardens can be used as shared infrastructure for neighbours to like think about transition. And in terms of Retrofit Reimagined that we were like working towards building on the first year of it in 2022, it really spoke to these first 2 kind of shifts that we were looking at making, moving from individual customers to neighbourhood collectives and looking at our streets as a living system, and how can we involve people in like looking at our streets in that way and thinking about their front gardens in different ways. So that's where we thought that we could start to test the front garden retrofit kit. And so our approach to this was to actually, I think here at We Can Make, they'd actually curated a set for front gardens here in Bristol, working with the neighbours here, and like actually selected different items from the Better Block library. And there were some items that represented ways to connect socially, and then there were others who kind of were more about the ecological side of things, so the planter and the hedgehog house as part of the kit. And so we wanted to think about how we could, because we were working with a particular street in Birmingham, to start to see how neighbours kind of organise together and how they make interventions in their own street together. We wanted to look at how people could take on a more ambassadorial role with some of these items of furniture in lots of different places. So there's a street that we've been working with called Link Road that you can see in the photo there. And this street is very special. It's really interesting in terms of how people on that street have organised. They have like some of the best street parties and have been doing it for decades. And so they connected with us and our work in Civic Square, and we started there with connecting with that street and people there taking on items from the furniture kit. Particularly the sharing library was of interest at first. And then from there, we started to distribute it wider. So at some of our events that we have, so we have the Big Lunch, which is like an annual event every year. And we started to set up a site for people to kind of co-build these items together and then take them home and test how they could start conversations with their neighbours on their street. So these are some photos of the different sites. And then we brought it into the Retrofit Reimagined festival season. So at each site we've been doing co-builds and then people taking away an item of furniture to try it on their street. So this was us at Borsall Heath, which was the first session. And yeah, you can see they're really quite vibrant and quite attractive. And so people got quite interested in what they could do with these. And so I'm just flicking through some examples of the pictures and how it's been. And this was at the Building Centre in London. That's the latest one that we did. Was it last week? Yeah, literally last week. There was a co-build outside the Building Centre in London, and this was the full set that was being taken and delivered to the Power Station Street in Walthamstow. And you'll see the film about that later on if you're about this evening. But they've taken that to see how people on their street will use it. And yeah, so this is back at Link Road again, and what we've found is that people start to think about how they would use each item. So the little sharing cupboard on Link Road, their walls are of different heights. So one family decided that they would dedicate their little sharing cupboard to children and children's books. And these are just some examples of where they've been situated. But they were quite, I think about them as quite a bit of a statement about like people who are interested in, or kind of signalling to this idea that they're interested in having conversations with their neighbours about retrofit. And one of the other things that we've been working on and designing or prototyping is a housewarming pack that we give to people alongside the items of furniture. So within that there is a blackboard and some chalk pens to make signage that makes invitations for people to come and engage with the items of furniture, offering a book as well to go in the little sharing cupboard, things like stickers to go inside books, and just there was a bunch of sort of street experiment challenges that we also included to kind of give ideas of what you could do to connect with your neighbours and try different things in line with the furniture. Oh, there goes my phone. So this is another family that took some items from the furniture kit, and they, you can see in the bottom, they used the blackboard off their own accord and just created signage and kind of almost signaled to the Retrofit Reimagined and being part of this movement. And it was really nice to see that someone had taken this up, and there's a small activity which was all about kind of grounding in your neighborhood, just doing the 5 kind of senses, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can smell. And it was kind of like how people really take the time to look at their local ecology and their neighborhood and slow down and making that invitation. And I think that's a wide part of the movement in the broadest sense that we need to kind of get involved in. And so we're seeing lots of different examples of this. And today we have a neighbour who is based in Bartley Green, an area of Birmingham at Dilwara, who took on a sharing library at the Big Lunch and has done some amazing things. So we want to have a little bit of a chat with Dilwara now as well to share her story of the sharing library that she took. So yeah, Dilwara, hey, welcome. And tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to kind of take on a sharing library when you came to the Big Lunch. What inspired you? What was driving you to do that? She's got the mic on.
Just checking if this is working.
Or maybe
Can you hear me all? Okay. First of all, thank you for having me here. I feel so honoured and humbled to be here and use this one. I feel really humbled to be here and to be able to talk about hosting a sharing library. So your question was, what interested me in hosting the sharing library? Well, there was no selling needed for me. As soon as I heard there's an opportunity to get a free library that I could have, I was there. I was like, I know it says B16 and it's for the local, but I'm not local. I live 25 minutes away in the suburb. Can I still come? Can I still come and take one? And they just saw my passion and they were like, we'll accommodate you. So that's where it started. But before I even got to the sharing library, I've always dreamed of living in a communal space where you connect with your neighbours and you're part of each other's life. Because I grew up in inner city Birmingham and we very rarely bought anything. Everybody in the street knew everybody. We always borrowed things. We always shared things. And now it feels like it's a new movement. If you want to be progressive, you have to learn how to share. And it really became apparent to me when I moved to where I live now, which is the suburbs. So going from inner city, well built up area to somewhere where it's more leafy and green, what was missing in that was the community bond. We may have been in a built up area, but everybody knew everybody, everybody looked out for everybody, and if you got off to mischief, your parents knew before you went home. Whereas now, where I live, no one knows nobody. No one wants to know anybody. They're in the me world. And that was me as well. I've been living in my house for 16 years. At least I'll say 8 years of that. I very much got in my car, went to work, parked up, went into my house, and I lived in my bubble. That changed when I had my daughter, and you realize you need people. Village brings up a child. You don't bring up a child on your own. So very soon I was like, right, I need to change the makeup of our environment. And before I came across Sharing Library, I came across a movement called Food is Free in America. And basically any surplus you grew, you put it outside, you had a cupboard, you shared it. And I loved that concept, but I couldn't realize it. So it's been in my dream for a long time until I came across Civic Square, and that's transformed not only my world and my life and my child's, but all those that go past me and my house now.
Thank you. And I've seen a lot of the outcome come from you just having that library and what you've been putting out on social media. So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about, like, of course you showed why you decided to take the sharing library, but what have you seen happen with it since on your street, and what have you personally done with it and the interactions with your neighbourhood and stuff?
So today marks the first month of the sharing library that I've been facilitating. So again, it's like his first birthday. And it honestly is really, really special, because even when I spoke to Daniel when we first met at B16 lunch, I was like, I really, really want to have one of these libraries, and I want to facilitate it, I want to host it, but I do have a reservation. One, I'm not in your postcode, so I don't quite fit your criteria. But the second thing is, we have very, very happy friends that go past at night time. So there is a risk. It may not last a week, but regardless of the risk, I still want to try. And thankfully, Civic Square, Daniel were like, you know, we will work with you. And even if it doesn't last a week, that's data, that's evidence of that social environment. No wrong is a wrong, there's learning in that. So with that in mind, we set up the sharing library in my neighborhood. So when I say my neighborhood, I mean my driveway. So if you look at the hedge on this end picture, that's my driveway with my cherry tree. That brick post where the sharing library is being housed actually belongs to my neighbor. So the day after I made the sharing library, I went to my neighbor speaking over the fence that we've now lowered. I said, oh, you won't believe it, I went to this thing and they were so amazing. We were the first ones there, but the last ones to leave, and they were packing up around us and they still couldn't get rid of me. And I've made this library, and guess what? They're going to give it to me, and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to put it on the road. By the way, can I use your brick post? So I only told her that bit after I sold her the idea. But to be honest, she's a Yorkshire woman. She didn't need it being sold to. She already has that makeup of live with the community. So again, I'm grateful for her for accommodating the sharing library. And I will say, it's a collaboration. It's not me on my own that's doing it. She's also doing it because she works from the downstairs front room, so she could see the crowds as they're coming and going. But I have to champion and give a shout out to my daughter, Aya Aliverk. She's 10. She checks in every morning before school, checks in every home time to see what stock is in there. Then she comes, Mama, all the children's books are gone. We need more children's books. Oh, there's no more seats left. What are we going to do about it? So, you know, it's not me. It's transformed her life. So I want to just give a bit more about why I chose to call it a sharing library than a sharing cupboard, which is what Civic Square have used. And that's very much to do with the makeup of my community, but also what I'm passionate about. So I chose books, plants, herbs and seeds. Without realizing, it very comfortably fits in with the Retrofit Reimagined concept for this year, which is people, places, people, land and material. So the sharing library is already addressing the people. In terms of the land, that's my phase 2 of the sharing library. I'm already developing in my head, and I believe it to be realized by the end of next frost. And then the material is happening because one, Civic Square provided me with the material, the sharing library. Can you believe it didn't cost me anything, but it's paying and serving so many people. What a privilege it is to have that. And thank you to both of you for making that a reality, and you know, to see the direct impact of that. So I think I may be ending up asking another question. Have I answered your question before I carry on? Yeah?
I was going to ask you to like kind of elaborate on some of that, because like some of the things that I've seen you share on social media as well, and like how people have started to take care of it as well beyond you. That's really inspiring to see as well. So, so any stories around that you want to share?
Sure. So, like my initial reservations about the happy friends that may help themselves to the box in whichever form they do, the community of Bartley Green also felt similar reservations, like, oh, it's not going to last a week, it's going to get vandalized, we've got challenging teenagers in the area. So I already had time to think about that, so my response to that was, yes, absolutely that could happen. I am with you with your reservations and your fear, but no, I'm not going to let a fear stop the opportunity to be happy and to create a healthier community. So I would hope, should that situation arise, there's good folks in the community that will step up and help with the DIY skills. Why do we have to always look at the negative and the vandals and the vandalism? Surely there must be someone to counterbalance that. We have tradespeople in the area, we have crafts makers, so will they not step in? Doesn't it work both ways? So I put that back out, and they were like, oh yeah, that's true, we never thought of it like that. So it's reconditioning the community, re-educating the community. And the fine example of that was within maybe 10 days or 15 days of the sharing library being installed, the Perspex glass door fell off. It's like, oh no, someone's damaged your sharing library. It's been vandalized by the teenagers. It's like, no. It was weather damage. It's impact of the weather. So I was coming home from school run, and I knew there was a couple behind me. When I saw it had fallen apart, I literally just stopped and I said, right, do you do DIY? Can you help me with this? And he didn't know how to respond. His name is Mark. He lives about 10 doors from me. We sort of nod at each other, but we don't actually talk to each other. I'm quite comfortable with that, because clearly their criteria is getting their kids to school, coming home, getting on with their job, and there's not really space for let's have a chitter-chatter. But in this incident, he had no choice, because I was in his face. Can you help me? And I knew he could help me because he always wore, working clothes. So the clue was in what he was wearing. He does some sort of DIY or construction or something, and he's like, oh, I'm a car mechanic, but I have something that could help. It wasn't even 5 minutes. He went home, he came back with his stuff, and he used this thing called, if anybody ever needs it, and I'm not getting commission for this, by the way, it's called Tiger Seal, and they use it for car bodywork. So he sealed it for me, put tape on it, and he said, leave it for 24 hours, let it set, and it'll never come off again. Interestingly, I met other parents on school run, and they're not convinced that it was weather damage. They still think it was vandals. But it just shows the depth of frustration and anger and maybe dislike towards certain population, and it's trying to break that belief system and saying, actually, it's not our teenagers. Yes, they may have challenges, but who doesn't? And actually, I've seen the great side of the teenagers. So my road serves 4 primary schools, 2 nurseries, 2 secondary schools, and a university. But it's called Chickens Lane. It's called a lane, but it's actually like an A road. It was totally mismarketed to me by my estate agent. Because I've lived in a road, I lived in a street, and I was like, I'm quite vintage, should I say. So why do I go and live in a lane? And I'll be living in like old English world. But it so wasn't, it's more like an A road. And for years, it really disappointed me with the noise pollution, the traffic pollution, the high footfall. But now, all of that's become the positive of the sharing library, because the number of users using, and I like to call them the takers rather than users, because our little strap line is take some, share some. So I call them the takers and the sharers rather than the borrowers, because that's what the City Council libraries like to use. And I'm not City Council. And I'm definitely not Birmingham City Council. there's been ample of sharers and takers, particularly children. Every morning, children, as you know, preschoolers, they will all look in, like pop their head in and look, and they'll be really disappointed if there's no children's books or if there's not a new supply of new children's books. And then home time is when they're not being dragged by the parent. You're going to be late to go to school. It's home time when it's a bit more relaxed and they stop and they look and they will take what they want. That includes secondary school children. You know those little rebels, the teenage generations? They actually do stop, and there's not been any vandals. They're interested in books. They want that opportunity. And my vision for the sharing library was there's two things that could empower people. One is literacy, and the second is skills. And that's what the sharing of books, plants, herbs and seeds is accommodating. And it's already begun. One mom told me recently that her child, he's only just learned to read, so he's probably on picture books with a few sentences. He takes all the thick books home because he wants to be like his mom. She reads big, thick books, and this sharing library offers big, thick books. So he's been helping himself every time he goes past, and his mom's like, he's taken so many, but he doesn't even know how to read yet. And I was like, oh, that's all right, because guess what he's doing is giving him that hope, is inspiring him. He may not be able to do those long sentences today. He will be in a year or two's time. But if you still feel there's a problem, tell him to come and see me. Tell him the owner of the library wants to have a chat with you and to bring all those books back that you're hiding under your bed or anywhere else. And maybe that will solve your issue of my son's not listening to me and taking big books. And then I've had another mum, and I always see her with her and several children running to school every day, and they're lagging behind, and one's like further ahead, like so ahead. And she stopped me in the middle of a conversation with someone else, and she says, there was no children's books this morning. I was like, oh, but have you taken any? And she's like, yes, my children take them all the time. Have you bought any back? Not yet. So you get all these conversations happening, and you start building relationship. You get to see the personality of the people, and you see the dynamics of households and families and where they are in their relationship. So suddenly I'm finding I'm the peacemaker. I'm the one that's putting bridges there between generations. And my latest one from this morning is, I'm not the guardian of the galaxy. I'm the guardian of the sharing library. So because this morning when I was leaving the house at 7 a.m., I quickly popped my head in and had a look again, like my daughter does. I also do that. And I found a really cute note in there. I have it on my phone if anybody wants to look at it later on. And it said, add some superhero books, please. Now have a guess who that may be from. Is that from a 90-year-old grandma asking for this book? Or maybe the 10-year-old boy who didn't like reading books and suddenly wants to read books. So I replied back to him, and I told my daughter, when you go to school, could you put that back in the box, because I don't have time to put it back in. And so, thank you for expressing your interest to want to read superhero books. All the books in here are donated or shared by people of the community. I tell you what, I'll put a request out for it, and let's see if that could happen for you. From Dilwara, guardian of the sharing library.
Wow. Sounds like you've had loads of fun with it. Like all those little small delights and small interactions with people in the everyday. It's just like, I think it just brings life to your daily routine. It just pulls you out or connect you to different people, and yeah, just learning more about your neighborhood. I find that part really, like, it's just endless fascination, endless delight basically. And I'm interested in also what tips you might have for someone else who's thinking about taking on an item of furniture, and ways that they could use it to connect with people in their neighborhood, or talk about the many different themes connected to retrofit of our neighborhoods. What sorts of things would you share with anyone who's thinking about that?
Just while you're thinking about that, it's also the Retrofit kit is an open source, downloadable, makeable anywhere infrastructure. So when you're listening to these tips that you're going to hear in a moment, like think about your own neighborhood, your own front yard, and what might be useful. And if this kind of infrastructure, and it is social infrastructure that we're growing here, what might you do with this? Because this has just happened from one kind of share. So I'm so psyched for what could happen from all of the people kind of here taking it further.
So my tips, first one will be think about why do you want it? What purpose is it going to serve for initially you, your household, then your immediate neighbor, and are you going to go further afield? Is it going to serve your neighborhood? So I set up because this became so popular, initially I started posting on Facebook page of the local community pages like Bartley Green Bulletin, Bartley Green page, We Love Bartley Green. There's like all these Bartley Green pages. And I found I was losing track of who I was responding to, which page I was, on and all that. So I then decided I was going to have a sharing library Facebook page and then just signpost people there. So the first point was why. And for me, it was, I want to see literacy in my community go up. I want to see skills go up. And why did I want that? Because I needed that once upon a time. And I know when you don't have that, how disenabling it is. But when you have literacy and when you have skills, how empowering and transformative that could be. And that, to me, was a pinnacle reason for why I wanted that in my community with the items I've chose. Now, there's been a request by my neighborhood asking, can we have a craft box? Can we have other things? So, for example, if you live in a close of 15 houses, that's got a different benefit to it. You could have a tool sharing cupboard. You could potentially have a crafts sharing cupboard. You could have a food box, the food cupboard. So you could customize it according to your location. I can't possibly put this is where my stereotype comes in of the local community. I can't possibly put in cans of food or fresh tomatoes or apples in mine because the teenagers may end up whacking each other across the road with it. High risk factor. But if you live in a close, I'm sure you could do that and the grandmas won't be throwing cans at each other and it'll be safe. Or maybe, it'll be like encouraging sporting. It depends what your priority is. And then in terms of, so that will be why and how, what your purpose is. Second is think about where you want to position it. And would it work for you? Would it work for your household? Would it work for your neighbors? Honestly, it does impact your neighbor. So get them on board if you want to do it. Especially if you've got high footfall. Like I said, my neighbor works from her downstairs front room. But either she's got triple glazings or she's just zones out. Because, there's a lot of noise around 3 o'clock till about 4 o'clock. And she's like probably on international conference on her Zoom. And you've got all this excitement going on in the house. So again, think about what would work for you. Now, I must now move from the sharing library to these amazing pieces of bench. And I've dressed up according to the bench. So, would you want some Retrofit front room for garden furniture? Would it work for you? How many pieces would you want? And what purpose is that going to serve? So first I had the library, and that was from B16. And then I went to the Retrofit Reimagined in Moseley in Birmingham, in Balsall Heath. And then I made one of these benches. I just went straight, where's the making going on? Right, I'm going to go there. Today I want to take a bench home with me. And I got a green one. I thought that will fit with my environment. Now, originally my vision was to put it on the verge. Can you go show how my road looks? So there, you can see where the arrow is. That's my hedge with the tree, and just tucked in that is the sharing library. And opposite to that is the tree with the verge. Now, that patch, 3 years ago, had no grass left on it, because on my left are 2 houses with landlords. They don't live there. They live somewhere where I call with like West Wings in a manor somewhere, and they come and just rent the house to somebody. And they were just parking their trailers on the green verge to the stage. They killed it all off. So I spoke to my neighbour, my partner in crime, give a shout out to Gillian here. And I said, look, we need to do something about it, because it just looks really tatty now. Because when I moved here 16 years ago, it was green and it was lush. And now all we have is dirt and dust. So we bought some, well, we didn't buy the tyres. I went around garages and I was like, can I have some tyres, please? And they're like, absolutely, because we have to pay to get rid of them. Take as many as you want. So I went and got all these tyres, and I plunked them on the 4 corners of that verge under the tree, and we planted that up. So it's wildlife friendly now. And I was originally in my mind's eye, my vision was that's where I'm going to plonk my green retrofit bench. And so when people are waiting for the bus stop, particularly thinking about the elderly members, maybe they'll have somewhere to sit, or they're using the sharing library, they could sit there and have a little read or a natter, and maybe I could go and chat to some more people. And then I had to rethink and think, well, that won't work, because then all our beautiful planting, that will get killed or stumbled over. So I thought I'll have it in my driveway. And this is about empowerment and skill. So Civic Square very nicely delivered it to me, all made up and everything. So again, cost me nothing, cost me no time, no transport. How amazing are they? Give them a clap. But where I'm lacking skills, the DIY, because again, I know area I live in, if I leave a bench outside, it's gone within 24 hours. And that's a guarantee, unlike the sharing library so far. So I want to get it chained to my wall. And I can't do that at the moment because I don't have the skill. So I've had to drag it through my house. It's currently sitting in my back garden. But you know when I said about my phase 2 vision for the sharing library, this is answering that whole ecology of that environment. What am I going to do? So I mentioned we accommodate plants and herbs and seeds. And that time of the year is usually come spring after the first frost. And my Facebook page has already had so many active members. I'm in my head already logging you're active, you're very positive, you're very creative, you're the green finger. I need to get all of you together come spring. And we're going to do a plant swap, plant sale, fundraise. And that's when my bench will come out. And maybe I'll have a few more pieces of furniture by then. Hint, hint. And I'm going to use that thing called driveway, you know, the car park, where it's no longer a green garden. I put my hands up, I inherited that driveway, so I'm not taking responsibility for it. So I'm going to use that space to do a collective and to build that community and invite individuals and say, you've been so good as sharers of the library, be part of my guardian of the library, and let's do some plants sharing, let's do some skill sharing, let's talk about how we collect seeds, how we store seeds, how we grow things, how we propagate things, and let's share if you got surplus, sell if we need to fundraise, and let's feed that money back into growing my vision of the Eden that I want to live in.
Thank you so much, Dilwara, for sharing so openly about your front garden experiments, and it's so inspiring to hear. Like, I think there's so much creative potential in people, and you just need to give them the resources to be able to try things out. And I think the thing that's interesting about your story for me personally is just these are our front gardens are spaces where we have some degree of agency over if we own it or we're renting it. We have some agency over that space, and we can make interventions, and we can look at our local neighborhood makeup to actually do informed things, and how we use spaces like Retrofit Reimagined to absorb knowledge and try different things and to move us towards where we need to get to collectively is possible through through tools like the Front Garden Retrofit Kit, but there's also many different things that people are doing and can do. And so I hope that this will inspire everyone who's here to try out this sort of things. And for us at Civic Square, we really are about trying to create that infrastructure that enables more people to do this sort of stuff in their neighbourhoods, and moving beyond like what the councils do, which is just consult people on planning and stuff like that, but actually giving the tools and the spaces and the learning opportunities for the skills and all that sort of stuff that will build the confidence that we all kind of need to step into these spaces that feel quite big and beyond our knowledge and our capabilities. But there's many different access points, and this can be one of them. So I hope you can talk to any one of the We Can Make team to find out more about their kits, and they've actually got the factory here, so if you're in Bristol you can probably talk to them about actually taking some away or taking it in for your garden. And then beyond, we are going to continue this conversation at the next Retrofit Reimagined sessions as well, so you can come and talk to us at the Civic Square team if you want to know more as well. So yeah, thank you.
I like, it's kind of a proper goosebump stuff when you talk and share your story. I mean, you've had this a month, Dewar, and it's like, I mean, you know, you're an incredible storyteller, and like you are the guardian of the galaxy and many more things as well. But I just like, I think it points to that, like that wider hunger for this type of connection that we kind of want to grow, and that's really powerful. And then it's also what we're doing is, this is what we're trying to prototype as a different way to do retrofit that really can invite everyone in and feed much more than just a conversation about U values or insulation performance. It's like, this is really deeper stuff, and we're retrofitting a lot more than just building stock. It's a lot more, there's deeper stuff is going on. So talk to each other, make the connections, and let's do more. That's very, very cool. Yeah, definitely last word.
I just want to give a shout out to my sharing library, so please have your pens ready or your Facebook page open. It's at Sharing Library 2023. Please follow my page, and it'll inspire you to see what sort of dialogues that are happening and how I record things, and hopefully it'll inspire you to make it yours, take ownership of it. I mean, before I was empowered, and I'm calling it empowered, I really had a dream, but I couldn't make it happen, and it's been realized now, and I know I matter, and if I matter, you matter. And if I could do it as an individual, we could do it as a collective. And I've been using that a lot in my Facebook posts when I write it. As an individual and as a collective, we can make a difference for a happier society. So give it a go.
Amazing. I want all of that written on a t-shirt, and then I'm just like, that would be great. Thank you so much, and thank you, Daniel. It's beautiful how you've held this as well and shared it. It's beautiful, really nice. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for coming all the way from Birmingham. I'm so sad that Rosa and Maria are two Knowle West residents who've been like doing a similar experiment to you, that they couldn't be here today for kind of work and funeral reasons. But anyway, they're here in spirit, and the love is all there, and you could definitely come hang out with them soon. Yeah. They'll be on the live stream. It's all good. And then what happens next now? So there we go, take a moment, pause, and the next thing, get to have a walk and get to explore Knowle West a little bit as well. So those who have booked in for the What Will Our Future Be Made Of workshop, show of hands, who's in for that? Cool. Okay, there should be about 15 of you. That's what that workshop is. If you're one of those people, stay in this space. If you're not, then you've got a delightful guided walk to be from Jim and Martha, and it's going to be assembling at the front there. So that's if your kind of mode of transport is walking. Some of you might have a different mode of transport. If that is the case, then grab a coffee, chill, and you can ride your bike, or you can push your bike on the walk, that's fine. And you can, or you can drive, and it's a short drive away, like Google Maps, you'll find your way. It's very easy. It's a very short walk, and a very short drive, really. So is that clear enough? If you're in the workshop, stay here. If not, go outside and assemble with Martha and Jim. Thank you.